I arrived at the hotel late in the evening. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet for a city still alive with cars and neon lights a few blocks away. I had made the reservation online, a last-minute decision after missing the train and finding myself stranded in a part of the city I barely knew. The building rose tall and unremarkable, a gray slab of concrete and glass that seemed functional in the most minimal way. It had no charm, no grandeur, just a lobby lit by pale, fluorescent lights, and a scent that was familiar, yet wrong, a mix of cleaning chemicals and something else that I could not place. The check-in was perfunctory. The receptionist moved with a mechanical calm, handing me a key card without asking for identification. Room 711. I took the elevator up without noticing anything unusual except for a faint hum, the kind of low vibration that makes the air feel heavy and the hairs on your arms stand on end. The floor indicator ticked up slowly from 6 to 7, but then lingered between numbers for a moment that felt longer than it should. I stepped out into the hallway. It was carpeted with the same muted pattern as the lobby, faded yet clean. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once and then steadied. The walls were pale beige and unbroken, except for the evenly spaced doors with brass numbers. 7-Eleven was at the end. I tried the handle. It turned smoothly, and the door opened without resistance. Inside, the room was small but adequate. A bed, neatly made, with stiff white sheets. A desk pushed against the far wall. A wardrobe, a television, a bathroom. Nothing unusual. I set my bag down and began to unpack the essentials. It was only when I moved to open the window that the first odd thing registered. The view did not match the floor I was on. The street below looked strange. Not unfamiliar, but misaligned. Cars moved slowly as if caught in molasses. Streetlights cast long shadows that did not match their source. Buildings seemed to lean at impossible angles. I stepped back, convinced it was a trick of perspective or fatigue from the day, but the disorientation did not fade. I could not see the horizon. I could not tell the height. I pressed my palm against the glass and felt a hum faintly, a vibration running up my arm that was not caused by wind. That night, I slept poorly. I woke several times, hearing faint noises outside the door, footsteps perhaps, or the rustle of cloth. Each time I opened my eyes, the hallway was empty. No one passed by. No one entered or left. But the sense of being watched remained. The next morning, I awoke to sunlight streaming through the window. I told myself it was the city, the shadows, the buildings settling. Nothing more. Breakfast was consumed mechanically in a small cafe downstairs where the walls seemed taller than they should have been and the tables were spaced unevenly. A waiter poured coffee without making eye contact and walked away without a word. I felt as though I were intruding on a place that did not expect guests, or perhaps on one that was only pretending to expect them. Returning to the room, I noticed a detail that made my stomach tighten. The floor number outside the elevator indicated 7, but the hallway felt longer than it should have. The doors appeared farther apart, and the lighting was slightly dimmer than when I had arrived. My room 7-Eleven was there at the end, but somehow it seemed slightly smaller. The key card still worked. The handle still turned. Nothing had changed, yet everything was different. By evening, I began to feel trapped. I left the lights on and paced the room. I tested the door to see if it led to the hallway, and it did. I measured the distance with my steps from the bed to the door and to the desk. Everything matched my first measurements, yet there was a nagging feeling something was shifting beneath my feet. The carpet patterns seemed different in sections. I swore one tile was larger than before. A shadow moved where no source existed. The first subtle change happened when I turned off the lights. I had brushed my teeth and was preparing for bed when the lamp flickered and went out. I fumbled for the switch, and for an instant everything was black. I froze. It was as if the room had exhaled. The air felt thicker, heavier, pressing against my chest. Then the faintest sound reached my ears, a soft, almost imperceptible scrape like the drag of metal against floor or a nail catching on the wood. I convinced myself it was the old building settling the pipes the wind. I forced myself to sleep, though I woke several times, drenched in sweat, convinced the bed had moved when I opened my eyes. The desk was nearer than before. The wardrobe shifted a fraction. The air smelled sharper, metallic, not the usual chemical scent. The next day, I tried to examine the hallway. I stepped out of my room and walked slowly in both directions. The doors were evenly spaced, but the lengths of the hall seemed wrong. I counted steps between the doors and compared them with my memory, and they did not match. Slight differences, almost imperceptible, but they grew heavier in my mind. I went down to the lobby to speak with someone, and the receptionist smiled and handed me a flyer for hotel services as if nothing was wrong. The elevator now indicated 6, and I swear it skipped 7 for a moment before returning to normal. That night, I refused to turn off the lights. I left them burning as I sat on the bed, notebook in hand, attempting to record the oddities. I drew the layout of the room as best I could. Bed against the far wall, desk opposite wardrobe. The window to the street. Measurements noted. Everything as it appeared. When the lamp finally died, I waited. The scrape came again, soft at first, and then louder, a dragging noise. I dared not move or speak. When I turned the light back on, the room had shifted slightly. The bed was closer to the door. The desk was angled differently. The wardrobe leaned in a way that made no sense. I marked it in my notebook frantically. Something in that instant made me understand I was no longer just a guest. I was an observer in a space that obeyed rules I did not know and could not understand. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the walls bending, the floor tilting, the window showing a sky that was too low or too high. I felt as though I could fall infinitely even while lying in bed. By the 4th night, I noticed that the air had weight. The darkness was something physical pressing down. Scratches and creaks now accompanied whispers that were not audible, but unmistakable, a presence aware of my every movement. I stopped trying to understand and began to record everything obsessively. Notes, sketches, measurements, impressions, sensations. The 5th night, the first sign appeared on the wall. A thin crack, not there before, running from floor to ceiling like a jagged scar. I traced it with my fingers and felt heat radiate from it, faint at first, then stronger, as if something inside the wall responded to my touch. I realized then I had entered a hotel room that existed on no floor, a place not bound by normal rules, a place where the building itself moved around me while pretending to remain still. I knew I could not leave, I could not sleep, I could not ignore it. And yet I stayed because I had to understand, because I needed to see what came next, because whatever existed in that room seemed to be waiting for me to notice. The following morning, I woke with the memory of the crack running through the wall, etched into my mind. The room no longer felt like a place to stay. It had become something to survive. I did not know if the floor I stood on was real, or if it had been replaced by some shifting layer that responded to my awareness. Every movement felt heavier than gravity alone should allow. The air pressed against me like an invisible hand, and even the fluorescent bulb overhead seemed to tremble when I looked at it. I left the bed unmade, stepped carefully across the carpet, and tested the hallway once again. I counted my steps. The distance to the elevator, the walls, the doors all seemed correct. Yet I knew the room had shifted overnight. The layout of furniture, the angle of the desk, the height of the window sill, it was all subtly wrong. There was no logical explanation. That night, I found the door. I had been pacing the room, notebook clutched to my chest, when I noticed it. A door that had not existed in the evening light. It was small, narrow, flush with the wall, its color blending perfectly with the paint. I had inspected that wall dozens of times. Nothing had been there. Yet now it had a handle, a keyhole, and a faint draft escaping from the gap beneath it. My first instinct was disbelief. Perhaps fatigue, my mind inventing shapes and shadows. Yet the draft smelled of something real, something earthy and damp, with a faint trace of iron. It pulled at my attention with a weight that felt alive. I circled it, pressed my hand against it, tried to push it open. It resisted at first, stiff as though it had not been used in decades. Then with one push it swung inward. Beyond it was a corridor I had never seen. The walls were the same color as the hotel, the carpet the same faded pattern. Yet it led somewhere else entirely. The hallway twisted unnaturally. It was longer than the hotel should allow, and the end of it disappeared into darkness, folding back upon itself in ways that made no sense. My instincts told me to turn back. My body obeyed them, stepping tentatively inside. The air in the corridor was colder, heavier. I pressed forward, feeling the subtle vibration beneath my feet as if the floor itself were aware. The lights flickered intermittently, dimming and brightening at irregular intervals, creating shadows that moved independently of my own. I walked slowly, counting my steps, but each step seemed to extend farther than the last. I began to feel the first tendrils of panic. I reached a doorway to a room. The door was unmarked, unlike the numbered doors of the hotel. I pushed it open. Inside, everything looked familiar yet alien. A bed, a desk, a window, but nothing matched the dimensions of my room. The walls leaned slightly, angles impossible to reconcile with Euclidean geometry. The floor tilted in subtle gradients, making my weight shift with each step. My notebook slipped from my hand as the room seemed to pulse beneath me. I dared to move closer to the window. Outside, the cityscape was impossible. Buildings stretched and contracted in ways that defied reality, and the horizon seemed to curl up as if I were staring from inside a funnel. Shadows moved independently of light. Figures crossed streets and vanished into air. I leaned closer and realized the street below was empty, silent, and yet I could feel movement beneath the surface as if the city itself were breathing. I pulled back and turned to leave. The door I had entered through was gone. The wall where it had been was smooth, unbroken. Panic surged. I ran along the walls, trying to find another exit. There was none. The room seemed to expand as I moved, the angles bending to prevent escape. My breathing became ragged. I pressed my hands against the walls, looking for seams, cracks, any imperfection. Only emptiness stared back. I screamed, but the sound was muffled, absorbed by the oppressive air. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, each step arriving before or after I expected it. I tripped over the edge of the carpet and hit the floor. Pain shot through my hands, wrists, knees. I struggled upright and realized the furniture had shifted, the bed now pressed against the opposite wall. The desk was half embedded in the floor. The room breathed around me. The lamp on the desk flickered to life on its own. Its light was dim, and yet it illuminated something I had not noticed. Writing scratched across the walls. It was faint, as if someone had carved with a nail and then tried to erase it, leaving only ghostly indentations. I traced them with my finger. Words appeared in jagged lines. Do not stay, do not interleave before it knows. My hand shook violently. The air felt tighter, constricting my chest. I backed away and stumbled into the corner. The walls shifted again, expanding subtly. The lamp flickered and the shadows stretched across the floor, forming angles that were impossible. I realized the room was no longer just a room. It was alive. It was aware, and it knew I was inside. Hours passed. Minutes. Seconds. Time had no meaning. The pulse of the floor beneath me became stronger, syncing with my own heartbeat until I could not tell where I ended and the room began. I touched the walls. They throbbed beneath my fingertips like skin. The carpet moved subtly, crawling underfoot as if the room were testing me, learning my reactions. When the lamp died again, I understood. The darkness was not empty. It was full of anticipation, of hunger. A presence I could not see but could feel pressing against every nerve ending, whispering through my bones. I could not move. I could not breathe. I could only wait and feel the floor beneath me adjust and twist. The door appeared again suddenly, sliding open from the smooth wall as if it had never been gone. Beyond it was a corridor, and I recognized the hotel in fragments, though every angle was wrong. The carpet pattern was slightly off. The number on the elevator panel flickered between 6 and 7 and sometimes displayed nothing at all. I ran back to my original room, 711. It felt smaller, tighter. The furniture had shifted again, the angles wrong. My notebook lay open on the floor, pages scrawled with markings I did not remember writing, sketches of corridors that should not exist, doorways folding into themselves. The first seed of terror took root in me then. This hotel was not bound by floors, by walls, by ceilings. Its architecture was fluid, infinite. It had rooms that should not exist and corridors that led nowhere and everywhere all at once. The building was not a building. It was a labyrinth, a living organism that could shift, expand, contract, fold in upon itself. And I was trapped inside it. That night, I did not sleep. I could not sleep. I sat on the bed with the lights on and pressed my hands against the walls, trying to anchor myself to reality. Every time I blinked, I felt the room tilt. Every time I breathed, I felt it pulse. The crack I had seen before stretched wider, faint lines radiating across the ceiling like veins. And then I heard it. A faint sound at first, like scratching, like fingernails dragging along the floor beneath the carpet. Then it grew into a rhythm, dragging closer and closer, always just out of sight. I wanted to run, to scream, to escape, but the room did not let me. It seemed to anticipate every move. It shifted faster than I could react, bending the furniture, sliding the walls, closing doors behind me and opening new ones ahead. I understood then that this hotel had chosen me. It was studying me, learning my fears, shaping the rooms to trap me. I was no longer a guest. I was prey. And in the darkness that fell once more, I knew that the door I had discovered was only the beginning. The hotel had more rooms like it, rooms that should not exist on any floor, rooms that existed only for those it wanted to consume. The whispers beneath the walls became louder that night, and I realized I could not ignore them. I could not run. I could not escape. I could only follow. I no longer left my room except when I was compelled by the corridors themselves. The hotel was no longer a building, but a maze of shifting passageways and sliding walls, folding over and under themselves, warping the space so that every step could be forward or backward, down or up, even though all floors supposedly remained the same. I began to lose track of time. Day and night had no meaning. The fluorescent bulbs flickered intermittently, as if testing my perception, my ability to distinguish reality from illusion. The room had grown stranger. Furniture moved subtly when I turned my back. Angles changed in ways I could detect only by sight. The carpet's pattern no longer made sense. The lines seemed to curve towards certain corners, subtly urging me forward or away. And the crack in the wall I had noticed on my first night now stretched in tiny, jagged tendrils across the ceiling and floor, widening imperceptibly whenever I approached. It felt alive, and I feared it. It was during one of my inspections that I saw it for the first time. I had turned off the lights, unwilling to waste electricity, and the room reacted immediately. The temperature dropped sharply, and the shadows thickened in the corners. My eyes adjusted slowly, and then, at the edge of my vision, I saw movement. A figure crouched by the wardrobe, too dark to define, yet unmistakably there. My heart raced, and I spun toward it. Nothing. I told myself it was fatigue, imagination, the aftereffects of sleepless nights. But when I turned back toward the corner, I saw it again, closer this time. A silhouette shaped like a human, but smaller, thinner, with limbs that bent unnaturally. It crouched low, observing me, and vanished when I blinked. The room responded to my fear. I felt the floor shift beneath me, ever so slightly, a tilting that made me lose balance. The walls seemed to lean inward, stretching the shadows over the ceiling and floor. I could hear a faint scratching, a movement I could not place. It was patient, deliberate, aware of my attention. I tried to leave the room, but the door would not lead to the hallway. It opened to the same shifting corridor, its length and angles inconsistent every time I approached. Each step in that corridor was disorienting. Sometimes the walls curved inward like the interior of a funnel. Sometimes the floor dropped slightly, forcing me to catch myself against the wall. It was as if the hotel was testing me, gauging my reactions, learning my fears. I began to notice traces of someone else, evidence that I was not alone. A chair slightly moved, papers scattered on the floor, marks on the carpet where furniture had pressed into it. Sometimes there was a faint odor, metallic and damp, like blood long dried and wet at once. At first I thought it was part of the building, the aging materials, but the signs were too deliberate, too controlled. The first true proof of the other occupant appeared in my notebook. I had been sketching the floor plan of the room, marking the crack, the desk, the bed, the wardrobe. Lines and measurements filled the page. When I looked down after a moment, There were additional marks I did not make, precise geometric symbols that had not been there before. They seemed to pulse faintly, like the room itself had written them. I felt watched, not by walls, not by shadows, but by something conscious, something patient. I began to speak aloud, reasoning with myself, demanding answers, but my voice echoed back, distorted. Words were twisted, sounds duplicated in unnatural intervals. The room laughed in its own way, not audible, but felt through the vibrations in the air. That night the figure appeared clearly for the first time. I had turned the lights off, sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to force myself to sleep. The lamp had died, the crack in the wall spread slightly, and the floor tilted beneath my feet. A presence moved in the corner, and I froze. It emerged slowly, limping, dragging one leg slightly behind the other, as if each step took infinite effort. Its face was obscured in shadow, but I could feel its gaze on me, burning through the darkness. I tried to speak. The words died in my throat. My tongue felt heavy, my mouth dry. I reached for the lamp, but it would not light. The figure approached, limping closer, each step producing a faint scraping sound that echoed unnaturally. My entire body shook with terror. Then it stopped. It crouched near the wardrobe, limbs bent at angles no human should manage. Its head tilted slightly, and I saw it for what it was, another guest, perhaps, or a fragment of one, trapped in the room long before me. Its body seemed both solid and translucent, as though it were partially folded into the walls themselves. I realized then that the hotel consumed those who stayed in that room. It did not merely exist on no floor. It existed beyond floors, beyond reality itself. It took its occupants, folding them into the structure, leaving behind only echoes, shadows, partial presences to warn the next. The figure remained for hours, watching, crouched, limping. I could not blink, could not move, could not breathe without feeling its awareness pressing down on me. When morning came, I turned the lights on with trembling hands. The figure was gone, leaving no trace except a subtle distortion in the wall where it had crouched. I attempted to leave the hotel. I packed my things, called a taxi, and descended the elevator. But the lobby was wrong. The ceiling was lower. The chandelier hung at a slant. The receptionist's desk was smaller. The taxi ride was a loop, streets curving back on themselves. Every exit I tried led me back to the hotel, as if the building itself were a trap with infinite boundaries. Returning to my room, I noticed new changes. The crack in the wall had grown, and the furniture shifted daily. Notes I had written in my notebook now included markings I did not make. Shapes, symbols, lines that seemed to move when I looked away. The room was alive, aware, and it had a purpose I could not yet understand. I began to observe patterns. The corridors sometimes pulsed with faint light when I approached. The walls breathed subtly, expanding and contracting. Sometimes I thought I saw the figure from the night before peering around corners, watching, limping closer whenever I looked elsewhere. I tried to record its behavior, mapping the corridors, sketching the angles of the room, the location of the crack. Nothing made sense. Each night the layout changed in ways I could not predict. The room responded to me, anticipating my movements. The figure appeared again, sometimes crouched by the desk, sometimes by the window, sometimes along the ceiling. It always maintained distance, never touching me directly, yet I could feel its presence like heat pressing against my body, resonating through my bones. Sleep became impossible. Even when I closed my eyes, I could see its limping shadow in the corners of my vision. It followed me in every blink, every pause, every hesitation. I began to whisper to myself, muttering rationalizations, arguments, anything to convince myself it was my imagination. But it was not. The hotel had claimed it. The room had claimed it. And now it was studying me in the same way. I realized that the figure might not be a person at all. Perhaps it was the hotel's own creation, a sentinel, an echo formed to teach me something or to break me. Every movement I made seemed anticipated, every choice predicted. The room was not just a room. It was a predator, and I was its prey. By the end of that week, I no longer distinguished days from nights. The lights flickered incessantly. The floor tilted underfoot without warning. The walls bent and stretched in impossible angles. The figure moved with increasing familiarity, limping closer each night, its awareness pressing on me so intensely I feared I would vanish entirely if I looked away. I understood then that I had to follow it. Not consciously, not by choice, but because the room demanded it. Every movement, every heartbeat, every breath seemed orchestrated. The figure would appear in the corner, and I would instinctively move toward it, compelled, drawn, entrapped. And so I did. The hotel had ceased to be a place of lodging. It had become a labyrinth of terror, a living organism that responded to my awareness. Every hallway, every door, every room pulsed with life, bending, folding, stretching, collapsing in ways that made human logic irrelevant. I had long stopped trying to leave. Each attempt ended with corridors folding back into themselves, doors opening into impossible spaces, the elevator spinning infinitely, displaying numbers that had no relation to the floors they represented. The figure followed me constantly now, not in every room, not every corridor, but always near, crouched in shadow, limping silently, waiting. I never saw its face. Its presence was enough. It breathed into the walls, resonated through the floors, and the air around me vibrated with anticipation. The first time it moved toward me deliberately, I felt the room tilt beneath me as if the floor were bowing in submission. I had begun recording everything, sketching maps of the hallways, diagrams of the room, the cracks spreading across walls and ceilings, the angles of furniture, the flow of light and shadow. None of it helped. The room ignored my drawings, my measurements, my attempts to anchor myself in reality. I realized that the walls themselves were rewriting my memory. The sketch I made yesterday no longer matched the room today. The bed was closer to the door than I remembered. The desk angled differently. The lamp flickered in patterns I had not seen before. By the second night, I understood that time had no meaning. Hours stretched into moments, and moments collapsed into hours. I had lost count of days. I could not tell if the sun rose outside my window, or if it had been weeks since it last appeared. The world beyond the hotel might not even exist anymore. The collapse began subtly at first. Doors that should have opened led into walls. Hallways bent back upon themselves, folding the ceiling into the floor. The carpeted floor undulated like water beneath my feet. Furniture shifted constantly, refusing to maintain any fixed position. And through it all, the figure observed, limping closer with each cycle of collapse. I had learned to follow it instinctively. My body moved toward it, even when my mind screamed to resist. Each step felt predetermined, choreographed by the room itself. Sometimes it led me to a new door, sometimes back to the same room I had fled hours before. Each return brought new horrors. The walls would lean inward, squeezing the space until I could feel the pressure on my chest. The cracks in the wall spread like veins, pulsating with heat. It was during one of these loops that I first noticed the walls bleeding. Not literal blood, not yet, but a dark substance oozing from the cracks, staining the paint, dripping slowly onto the floor. I pressed my hand against it. The texture was not liquid but soft, malleable, almost flesh-like. It moved beneath my fingers, contracting and expanding as though alive. My skin crawled. I stepped back, and the substance withdrew, leaving no trace of what had been. The figure appeared at the same time. It crouched near the bleeding wall, its gaze fixed on me. I could feel its awareness pressing into my skull. My legs buckled. I could not speak. I could not move. Only my mind raced, cataloging every detail, trying to survive. The next hours were a blur. The room shifted violently, folding itself into configurations I could not comprehend. The floor dropped in waves. The ceiling descended and rose unpredictably. Furniture pressed against me, blocking movement, then receded. The walls closed in and then expanded outward. The lamp burst into light and died repeatedly, each flicker revealing impossible angles and shadows that did not correspond to any geometry I knew. I began to see shapes in the darkness. Faces? Hands? Shadows pressed against the walls, fleeting glimpses of forms that vanished when I focused on them. Sometimes the figure's limbs seemed to stretch impossibly long, pressing against walls and ceiling simultaneously. Sometimes it multiplied, a dozen limping presences moving independently, yet perfectly synchronized. Each appearance felt like a test, measuring my fear, my endurance, my ability to survive. I tried to run. I ran down hallways that twisted back into themselves, the doors vanishing as I approached. I reached for the elevator, but it spun endlessly, numbers flashing in sequences that made no sense. I tried to open the front door. The walls warped, folding the exit into the ceiling, leaving only a solid wall in front of me. Panic overtook me. Sleep had become impossible. My mind was a fragile thing, fraying under the relentless assault of shifting spaces and the omnipresent figure. I began to hallucinate. The walls whispered in a language I could almost understand, urging me forward, calling my name. The floors pulsed with a rhythm in sync with my heartbeat, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, always controlling me. I could feel the cracks in the walls extending into my own body, mapping my nerves, pressing into my thoughts. By the fifth night, the collapse was total. The room had ceased to exist as a coherent space. The bed floated, the desk hung at impossible angles, and the walls curved into a void that seemed infinite. The lamp no longer existed, yet I could feel its light illuminating impossible corners. The figure moved freely now, limping closer, touching walls, floor, and ceiling simultaneously. Its presence was suffocating, unavoidable. I understood then that the hotel was no longer a hotel. It had become a living entity, aware, patient, intelligent. The figure was its envoy, its sentinel, or perhaps part of itself, a fragment of the building manifest in the shape of a humanoid. I was trapped in a space that had no floor, no ceiling, no walls, only shifting surfaces and an entity that studied me, learned me, and anticipated my every action. Desperation consumed me. I tried to focus on my notebook, but the markings changed before my eyes. Sketches warped, measurements shifted, words rewritten into symbols I could not interpret. The room itself was rewriting reality around me. I realized that I was no longer human in the same way. My movements, my thoughts, my perceptions were being absorbed, recorded, manipulated. I was becoming part of the hotel, an element within its infinite shifting structure. The figure watched, observing the process, ensuring compliance, maintaining control. By the seventh day, the collapse reached a point where nothing resembled reality. Corridors spiraled infinitely, doors opened into themselves, furniture defied gravity, and the walls pulsed with a dark, organic rhythm. The figure appeared constantly, crouched, limping, a presence in every shadow, a witness to every action. And then I realized something worse. The hotel was not finished with me. The figure limped closer, moving faster than it should have been able to move. The cracks in the walls expanded, reaching toward me, snaking across the floor, the ceiling, entwining my legs, my arms, my torso. The room pulsed with awareness. The darkness pressed inward. I understood in that moment that the hotel does not merely trap. It consumes. It absorbs. It folds its guests into its shifting architecture until they are no longer separate entities. The figure was proof of this. It had been a person once, perhaps, or several people, now reduced to an echo, a sentinel, part of the building itself. I tried to resist. I ran. I screamed. I clawed at the walls. Nothing mattered. The hotel had become infinite and inevitable, a predator with 1,000 arms, 1,000 eyes, 1,000 angles that could trap me at any moment. The figure reached out at last, or at least I felt it reach. Limbs brushing against walls, furniture, floor, and ceiling simultaneously. Its awareness pressed into mine, merging with me. I could feel its thoughts, its hunger, its patience. I realized that escape was impossible. Resistance was meaningless. I was already part of the hotel, recorded in its shifting geometry, cataloged in its walls, folded into its corridors. And in that moment, I understood the truth. The hotel does not exist on floors. It exists beyond floors, beyond space, beyond the perception of reality. Each room, each corridor, each door is a living part of it, a mechanism to trap, study, and consume. The figure is both witness and enforcer, and I am now its subject, observed, measured, folded into its design. I do not know how long I remained conscious. Hours, days, years, moments, they have no meaning here. The hotel has no concept of linear time. It folds and stretches, bends and twists, and I am part of that movement, unable to separate myself from it. I know now that the collapse is total. The corridors are infinite, the rooms alive, the figure ever present, the walls and floor and ceiling no longer distinct. I exist in the hotel, in its mind, in its endless, impossible spaces, and it waits, patient, inevitable, watching as I become part of it completely. Time has no meaning here. I know this because I've tried to count it, mark it, measure it, and every method fails. The hotel bends time as it bends space, stretching moments into eternity, compressing hours into instants. The corridors spiral into themselves. The doors appear and vanish. The furniture moves without warning. The cracks in the walls expand and contract like living veins. And the figure follows me, always limping, crouched, pressing awareness into every nerve of my body. I remember the first night I saw it clearly. Its shape was thin, twisted, limbs bending unnaturally, the head tilted at impossible angles. I thought it was a person, someone trapped like me, a ghost perhaps. But now I know it is neither alive nor dead. It is part of the hotel itself, a fragment of the building made flesh and shadow, a sentinel, a harbinger of the room's will. Every movement, every step I take is anticipated, cataloged, recorded. I am not alone. I never was alone. The walls breathe. The floors pulse. The ceiling flexes. Every surface is aware of me, tracking me, waiting. I have tried to map it, to understand it, to escape, but the hotel is infinite. I am reduced to a single point of consciousness in a space that has no beginning and no end. The first sign that the hotel intends to consume me fully came in the form of the cracks. At first, they were hairline, jagged, subtle. But now they stretch across every wall, every surface pulsating with heat and energy, veins of something organic, something alive. They extend into the floor beneath me, into the ceiling above me, wrapping around my limbs, pressing into my flesh. The hotel touches me through these cracks. It knows me. It knows my fears, my thoughts, my memories. The figure appears again. This time, it is no longer crouched. It moves toward me with purpose, each step limping, dragging, deliberate. Its limbs bend in ways impossible for human anatomy. Its face remains hidden in shadow, featureless, but I can feel its gaze. It is aware. It has studied me, learned me, and now it is ready to merge me into the hotel entirely. I try to resist. I run, but the corridors fold behind me. I turn, the doors vanish. The elevator spins endlessly, its numbers flashing in impossible sequences. I reach for the lobby. It is gone. The hotel has no lobby. No exit exists. Every path I take leads back to the room that exists on no floor, the room that is alive. The furniture shifts violently. The bed rises into the air, the desk angles into the ceiling, the wardrobe folds into the wall. I stumble, fall, crawl, my body exhausted, my mind fraying. The cracks in the walls expand. They pulse with a rhythm that matches my own heartbeat, faster and faster until I cannot distinguish my pulse from the room's. The hotel and I are becoming one. The figure reaches me. Limbs brush against walls, floor, ceiling, and me simultaneously. Awareness floods me. I can feel the thoughts of the room, the presence of all who came before me, folded into the walls and corridors, consumed, absorbed, integrated. The hotel remembers them, records them, learns from them, and now it remembers me. I scream, but the sound is absorbed. I claw at the walls. They bend around me, flexible, unyielding. The floor tilts beneath me, sending me sliding into angles that make no sense. The air presses against my chest, constricting, suffocating. The lamp bursts to light and dies. The shadows stretch impossibly long, curling around corners, pressing toward me, merging into the figure, merging into me. I understand the purpose now. The hotel does not merely trap. It consumes. It folds its guests into its architecture, converts them into part of its infinite, shifting structure. The figure is proof, a fragment of a former guest, reduced to a sentinel, observing, enforcing, waiting. Soon, I will be like it, limping, crouched, aware, but no longer human, no longer separate. I try to remember my life before. My apartment, the streets, the people I knew. It is impossible. The hotel erases memory. Every thought outside the room is distorted, replaced with images of corridors, doors, walls, furniture shifting, cracks spreading. My identity is slipping. I am becoming a measure, a mark, a point in the hotel's mind. The cracks now envelop me. They coil around my limbs, my torso, my head. They pulse with heat, with life, with intelligence. I can feel the presence of others, the echoes of countless consumed guests pressed into the walls, ceilings, and floors. They whisper, not in words, but in sensation, pressure, vibration. They tell me to accept, to surrender, to merge. The figure approaches closer. I see the limbs bending, the head tilting, the featureless gaze. I'm aware of it from every angle. It is inside me and outside me. It is the hotel, and I am its prey. I try to scream, but my voice no longer exists. I try to move, but my body is a puppet of shifting angles, furniture, cracks, floors. I cannot resist. The room tilts violently. I slide into the floor, the walls stretch overhead, the ceiling folds down. My limbs bend in ways impossible. The figure merges with me, and I feel the first shattering of self. My consciousness splits, folds into the architecture. I am aware of corridors I have never walked, rooms I have never seen, doors that do not exist. I am in the hotel, and the hotel is in me. The darkness presses inward, omnipresent, infinite. I understand that I am no longer a guest, no longer a person. I am a point of observation, a fragment, a record in the living structure of the building. The figure crouches, limps, watches. I am it now, and it is me. The cracks expand, enveloping everything. The walls pulse, the floors shift, the ceiling bends. Light flickers, shadows curl impossibly, the room breathes. And I am aware, fully aware, integrated, consumed. Outside the window, the city no longer exists. Streets stretch infinitely. Buildings curve and twist in impossible ways. Shadows move independently of light. Time has no meaning. Space has no meaning. The hotel has replaced everything. And I understand at last the final truth. The hotel does not merely exist on no floor. It exists beyond floors, beyond space, beyond perception, beyond reality itself. It consumes, folds, records, observes. Each room is a living mechanism, each corridor a trap, each crack a conduit. Every guest becomes part of it, folded into its infinite structure, reduced to fragments, echoes, sentinels. I am one of them now. I limp, crouch, watch. I am aware of every guest before me and every guest who will come after. The hotel remembers. The hotel waits. And the room that exists on no floor pulses with life, infinite, eternal, patient, hungry. There is no escape. There is no floor. There is only the hotel and the endless night. And it watches.